Hey, it's me. You're tuned into another episode of the Paul Leslie Hour, and on this episode, we have Mike Hagerty joining us. He's an actor of television and movies. He's appeared in countless titles, from movies you know like Overboard, So I Married an Axe Murderer, Wayne's World, Austin Powers, to a lot of the popular television shows like Friends, Seinfeld, Boston Legal, Desperate Housewives, and Curb Your Enthusiasm, just to name a few. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Mike Hagerty. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for tooting my horn there. I mean, that's really nice of you. It sounds a lot more impressive than I think it is, but you did a nice job with it. Thank you.
Well, thanks. So I think most stories are best from the beginning. Your roots are in Chicago. What was the day in, day out like for you growing up?
Well, it was, pretty blue collar. My father was a Chicago policeman, and as was my grandfather. All four of my grandparents came from Ireland, and on my mother's side, he was a Chicago policeman, and she taught school in Ireland and also here in the States. And then he was a policeman during the Al Capone era in Chicago. And then my father came along, and he joined after World War II. Stayed on until like 1976. And my mother was a crossing guard, and so I come from very blue collar roots on the south side of Chicago. And I thought it was a pretty average thing growing up there. It was kind of unique in many ways. In fact, we're having our grade school reunion, which is I think is kind of unique anyways. I'm not sure if I can make it in this year, but it'll be 50 years since we graduated from grade school, and a lot of the kids are coming back. In fact, a lot of the kids never even left the neighborhood. They either bought the house next door, or they bought the house across the street, or they actually inherited their parents' homes. So a lot of them stayed in the neighborhood. So I'm kind of curious if I can clear the time, I might try to go back and just touch base with them, because I really kept in contact with quite a few of them over the years. And the neighborhood is, it's different, but in many ways the same.
So what does Chicago mean to you?
Well, it's meant a lot to me, literally, because, since my family came over from Ireland, the city of Chicago basically provided them their sustenance. They were, they all worked in some respect. On my side, worked for the Chicago Transit Authority. He was a brakeman on the old cable cars they used to have, or the streetcars. And so, they came here around the turn of the century. Both families came over about 1912, and the city provided them with work. It's provided them with protection. Family. It's I'm really tied into it a lot, not just because I was born there, but emotionally I have ties. I really feel that it's definitely my home. Even to this day, I still follow all the Chicago sports teams. I still get back if they're in the playoffs and try to spend some time there. I spent more time there when my folks were still alive, but I still get back 3, 4, 5 times a year just to sort of recharge my batteries.
If I had to bet my money, I would say that you're a Cubs fan.
Well, I was lucky in that respect. I was born on the west side. Now, normally when you think about the Cubs and the Sox, you think, the west side is sort of a neutral area. You could pick your team. Generally, if you're from the south side of Chicago, you're a White Sox fan. If you're from the north side of Chicago, you're a Cubs fan. Now, in my case, I was born on the west side, and then we moved out to the south side. My father had to stay in the city at the time, and I think it's still the law in Chicago that if you work for the city, draw a paycheck from them, you have to live within the city limits. So we moved out to the south side, and when I was a kid, I went and saw a lot of Sox games because, frankly, it was just closer to my home. We lived in an area called Morgan Park or Beverly, and it was just closer, easier to go there. But my dad was a Cubs fan, and we got up to Wrigley Field every once in a while. But if my first baseball game that I remember as a kid was going to see the White Sox play at 35th and Shields. So as I got older, I started working in Second City, and they had a relationship with the Cubs, and the Cubs were doing really well back in '84. The whole team kind of turned around. You could walk in that ballpark and sit anywhere you wanted to up until 1984. And then things changed. So I'm one of those rare breeds that I like both teams. I haven't declared for one or the other, but I guess just by birthright, I suppose I'd have to say that I'm a South Sider.
So you just mentioned a second ago the Second City.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about what you learned from that experience, and also just maybe a story from that time.
Well, I learned a lot. I was at the University of Illinois in Chicago and studying theater there. And Jim Belushi was finishing off, I think he was at Eastern Illinois University, and he was going to the University of Illinois Chicago to get some credits to finish out his degree. I don't think he finished at Eastern. So I ran into him, and we were actually doing some improvisation. We were studying improvisation, but not like Viola Spolin and Paul Sills or the Second City style. This was actually going back to the Italian Renaissance when they were doing things that I think they called them Lazzi's, I think it was, with just little scenarios, or they would literally ask the audience for suggestions, and then they would use their stock types to play these different characters, and the audience knew what kind of behavior to get from these stock types. And that tied in very closely to what Second City did. I mean, a lot of the characters at Second City are stock types, because you only have a few seconds to establish who you are, and then take a scene and then improvise it. So I was improvising there, and Jim saw me, and he said that he was in the touring company at the Second City, and I should really get up there on a Monday night and see them perform. I think it cost like $1.50 to go see the touring company on a Monday night. And I had heard of Second City, but I was always thinking of myself more as a scripted actor. I sort of figured the idea of improvising or doing it without a net, So anyways, I went up and saw him on a Monday night, and he and his company were doing, the actors perform. Monday night is the night off for the main stage. Jim was in the touring company. It was my first introduction to Second City, and I sat there and I just dropped my jaw. I said, this is really what I want to do, and sort of opened a whole new world for me. And what Second City teaches you, some people almost talk of it as being like a school, and it is a school in some respects, but you do it all yourself. I mean, you find out who you are, and I think that's why one of the keys as to why it's so successful, because you go there and you just have, just yourself. You get the suggestions from the audience, and then throughout the time that you're there, you improvise 5 of the 6 nights that you work, and you figure out who the best Mike Hagerty is, what characters are his, what you can own. And so then when you finally put up a review, those are scenes that are based on your experiences and things. So it really just sort of lets you discover who you are. And that's invaluable as far as this business is concerned.
I'm curious, when you encounter or when you work with somebody who was a fellow Second City person, like, I don't know, let me throw out an example, like Bonnie Hunt. Is there a kinship, like a fraternity kind of, is it like, a fellow Second Cityer?
Yeah, there is. Bonnie was just coming in when I was leaving there. It takes a while to work your way up to the main stage. So I knew Bonnie, and she was in the touring company, or one of the touring companies behind me. And Bonnie always stuck out. She's very talented, and we became friends before we started working together. And you do have a certain shorthand, that you develop at Second City. If you work with a Second City actor and they pair you up on something else, you don't really have, it's not languages or cliches, but your method is very similar. So you can take the short road to get to the essence of the scene, hopefully. And so then later on, when Bonnie was having a lot of her success and things like that, she would also reach out to me or to other people that worked at Second City and hire them for different projects. And that saves you a lot of time too. I mean, it saves you a lot of time in the casting. You don't have to get to know each other. You have a certain amount of chemistry that you just sort of understand, and you have a similar background, you know. So Bonnie and I have become, you know, have remained lifelong friends, and it all started back there at Second City.
At the top of the interview, I was listing just some of the movies and some of the TV shows that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Could you put a number on it? How many total credits do you have?
Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's over 100 credits on TV alone, and then I'm not exactly sure on the movies. You know, I know it's north of 30, but I'm not exactly sure. You know, maybe I should count them. I don't know. You know, but but a lot of the work has been in TV, and I think at least 30 movies. But a lot of those things in movies and also in TV, I mean, you take them as a credit. Some of them, you know, were larger than others, and some were just, you know, a couple lines here, a couple lines there, maybe one episode here. But you know, it's all work, you know, so it all adds up. So you know, it's been a lot. I've been very fortunate. But that goes back to the Second City training, and also, you know, it's nice. It's always a good thing if you work with somebody and they want to work with you again, and so that's always nice.
Well, what about somebody else that makes you think, gosh, I hope I work with him again, or I hope I work with her again? What do you look for in a collaborator?
Well, you know, it's all depends on what kind of project you're working on. If you're improvising, you know, I'll take anyone from Second City that's gone through the training and also has, you know, appeared on the main stage or the second stage there. It's called Chicago's ETC. That's the backstage at Second City, and it's by no means a second string. I mean, it's just another stage. There's so much talent there in Chicago, and so many people are coming there from all over the world nowadays. Enjoyed working with all of them, and I remained friends, I got to say, with just about absolutely everybody that I've worked with, you know. So I look forward to seeing them, and it's nice to see them, you know, at happy occasions when somebody's daughter gets married or things like that, you know. But we're definitely a family, you know. So or fraternity, or there's so many words that you can use for it, you know. But boy, I'll tell you, it's just great to see everybody. It really is.
Now, this one might be a hard question, but could you say that of all the TV and movie jobs that you've done, has there been one that was a most satisfying project to work on?
You know, I really enjoyed working on the George Carlin show. You know, it was great just being on that set. We did it for about a year and a half, and you know, you got to see George Carlin every day, and George was a great human being. I mean, really was. And you know, he brought his family in there. His brother Patrick was always around there and things like that. I mean, you know, his daughter was there, Kelly, and you know, not that Kelly she was a woman by then. She wasn't just a little girl that was hanging around the set, but she was contributing. But we had a great work relationship with all of us on the set. We all loved each other, and I loved being in there from Monday to Friday, and then I didn't look forward to the weekends because that meant days we didn't get to hang out together. I mean, there was just a great crew, you know, and really enjoyed it. So, I mean, when you ask me that question, I mean, that's the first thing that leaps to my mind. It was just a great experience. And then just to be around George and listen to him and, you know, his asides and his jokes and just his humanity. He was a lot of people think that the character he portrayed on stage was him, like a curmudgeon or something like that, but he wasn't that at all, and that was a bit of a persona. But I mean, you got to know him. He was just a soft-hearted, generous man, and so that's what pops to my head when you ask me that.
Who would you say you would like to work with that you haven't yet?
Let's see. Well, there's so many of my people that I like to work with. I did work a little bit with Marty Short on a short-lived TV show that he had. I always look at that. Steve Martin would be very high on my list. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. I know that he and Marty are traveling around the country doing a show, or they were until recently. I think they filmed it for HBO. There's so many people I admire, but I've been lucky enough to work with so many of the great people. I mean, I actually even had an opportunity to work with Jackie Gleason, who is very high on my list of people that I admire. I was in his last film called Nothing in Common, and with Tom Hanks and himself. So I got a chance to meet him. So there's just I've worked with a lot of the really good people, and I'm glad there's still really good people out there that I would like to work with. But but Steve Martin would probably be at the top of the list.
I wanted to ask you about a couple of the shows that you were on that, to me, were memorable.
Sure.
Every now and then, I'll run into people about town here, and they'll say, "So, who you got coming on next?" Or, "What's next? What's on deck?" And when I told them about you, and I would show your picture, everybody had a different, "Oh, that's the guy from fill in the blank."
Right.
But tell us about your memories of the Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I had worked with Larry David on Seinfeld. I did a episode. It was an hour-long episode, and it's been split up into 2 episodes when they syndicated. But the hour-long episode, I mean, it was I think it was called The Raincoats. I think it was called.
Indeed.
And it had something to do also with. I think something to do with them going to see Schindler's List or something too. If that was the same episode, they sort of bleed into each other after all the years. So I had worked with Larry on that show, and it was an hour-long episode. So it took us, I think, 9 or 10 days to rehearse it, because the time they usually allow for those things is 1 week. And it's a half an hour. So we did this all in one block, and they split it up into 2 episodes for the syndication. And so I had a rapport with Larry, and I also know Jeff Carlin from Chicago. Jeff was behind me at the Second City, but we knew Jeff was doing mostly stand-up in Chicago at the time, and I think he was working in the touring company. And so we had a relationship, we were friends. I was moving on. I was probably going off to Los Angeles at that time, or maybe to New York after I had left Second City. But we'd kept in touch over the years. So Jeff is not only plays Larry's manager on the show, but he also is a producer. So they brought me in, and when you work with Larry David, he gives you a scenario. He's got an idea in his head that which way the show is supposed to go, and he kind of tells you an outline of what that is, and then you improvise, to get to that scene. Now, I was very lucky in that I was able to, when he told me what he wanted and what points have to be hit in order to move the action along, I was able to give him what he needed. There was a scene where he said. His direction to me was take over the dinner at this at Larry's home. So I said, okay, all right, that was a suggestion, much like getting a suggestion at the theater in Chicago at the Second City. And so I just ran with it, And at his home, I start saying grace, using the Catholic grace, and take over sit in what would normally be the host's seat. I took the seat and sort of, imposed myself upon his dinner, and he was very, very, very happy with that. That was just fine. So I gave him what he wanted, and we got out of there pretty quickly. That's what he needed. I don't know if it was exactly what he had in mind, but whatever I came up with was fine with him. And then we moved on. And then we moved on later on to the Amco station, and then we had another scene there. Again, he gives you the scenario or the idea, what points you have to sort of hit, and then we improvised, and we got out of there pretty quickly too. So it was a very fun week, and I mean, I really look back on it with a lot of affection, and because I gave him what he wanted, and it worked. I think it worked very well for the show.
Is there a facet of what you do, a part of acting that you find the most gratifying?
Yeah. I mean, I like doing some of the dramatic things too. I mean, I know that people say that comedy is hard, is harder to do than not tragedy would be giving it a little bit too much, but doing serious acting. I don't see much difference between the two. I think it's just that you're hired to do a job, and you try to do it to the best of your abilities. Good writing is very, very helpful, because good writing is like a roadmap. It tells you, it gives you all the points, and if it sounds funny on the page, you can make it. You're going to either make it funny or make it or embellish it and make it even better. But I also enjoy doing the dramatic parts too. And I've had an opportunity to do a couple of those in some of the 90-minute shows. What comes to mind is like Boston Legal was one I was able to do that on, and there was another one of David Kelly's shows. He gives me a chance every once in a while, and just to do, to use your dramatic chops. So the most gratifying thing is not necessarily to be funny or to be dramatic, but when you get done and you're going home, you're halfway there, and you say, I touched all the bases. I was happy with that. That was a good day. So that's, and you wake up the next day and go on to the next project.
We're talking with actor Mike Hagerty. Who would you say taught you the most about acting?
Other actors, I think. Watching them, working with them. There was a lot of teachers at Second City. Bernie Solins comes to mind. Of course, everybody talks about Del Close. I was in Del's workshops. I got kind of, I think I got kind of lucky with Del. I mean, there was, when I was there was workshops. All right, there was a couple of workshops that were going on, but it wasn't like the structure that they have nowadays, where they have these different levels and people have to go through. And frankly, I don't know how anybody makes it through all those levels and gets to the main stage. I mean, when I was there was a couple of actors that were in front of you, maybe in a couple of touring companies or maybe in the Chateau Louise company, and you could sort of progress through. And some of it was just, if you were lucky enough to look a bit like the person that you were replacing. Now, when I was there, I would fill in for people like George Wendt, and George would go off and do a commercial or a film, or he was starting to go to getting called to Los Angeles more often, and I was behind him there, and so I was the big guy. Again, going back to Commedia, there were certain stock types. So somebody that looked like you, and you could fit into the costumes, and you would possibly be the understudy, and then hopefully they would choose you to replace that person when there wasn't a guarantee. But when it was time for them to leave, hopefully you would be next in line to get in. So I learned a lot from watching them. I sat there for a couple of years in the touring company on what they called the bench. You sit there with Joyce Sloan, and who's just a wonderful person. She's gone now, but she was just the mother to all of us. And you'd sit there and you'd watch them, and you would learn. I mean, after when I first saw Second City, I was so amazed at it, because they were just doing it on stage, and they seemed to be working without a script and coming up with these funny lines and everything else. And the first time you see it, the first couple times you see it, I mean, you don't see all the strings, you don't see the technical things, and it's just magical. But then you watch it for a while, and you realize that there is a lot of technique to it, and a lot of things that you can learn by observing. So, in general, I would say my college professors were great. At the University of Illinois, I was there at a really interesting time in Chicago, when there was a literal renaissance going on in theater. I mean, that's when Steppenwolf was starting up, and the organic theater, people like Stuart Gordon, and there was things going on there that it was amazing storefront type theater. You could be in Chicago and be an actor and still not make a lot of money, but be able to make a living and not starve the way you would have to do if you were out in Los Angeles or in New York. It was a nice and a place that you could fail and learn your craft. So all of us working together and not knowing that we shouldn't be able to do this and just doing it, which is what people did. They would just rent a storefront and put on a play and ask people to come and see it, and then the papers in Chicago would support it. And the next thing you know, there was another theater, another one blooming across the street. And so there was people like David Mamet and all this. It's all happening in Chicago in the 80s and in the early 90s. It was a great time to be there. So the biggest answer to your question was working teaches you how to act. And when somebody asks me and say, how can I get into this? How can I do this? My simple response is get on stage. Anywhere you can get on stage, anywhere you can get in front of an audience and ply your craft. Do it as often as you can. The more often you do it, the better you'll be, and the better you are, the more you work, the more you work, the more you get paid. And there you go. Yeah.
Are you a music fan?
I wasn't brought up with that. I mean, music as far as like Chicago blues or something like that, or just.
Like, what's your taste in music?
I've gotten much, rather traditional. I listen to a lot of the standards now. I don't, I'm not, rock and roll is fine with me. I mean, like Springsteen, I guess he's probably considered one of the standards now. I guess, he's getting it when you have your own station on Sirius XM. I guess, you're starting to become pretty traditional. Yeah, and I like standard stuff. I like Sinatra, I like Tony Bennett. Randy Newman was just at the Hollywood Bowl just the other night. I really wish I would have known that I should have paid more attention to it, because I would have liked to have gotten out to hear him perform. So, and I used to enjoy folk music a lot too, and that has a renaissance every once in a while. But back when I was in Chicago, there was a big folk music scene, and right across the street from Second City was a place called the Earl of Old Town, and then there was all sorts of bars that were up on Lincoln Avenue, like Holstein's and Somebody Else's Troubles, and people like Stevie Goodman and John Prine and people like that used to play there. And that was just, they were just storefronts, and you go in there, there'd be 10 or 12 people sitting around and people just telling the stories. It was wonderful. It was a great time to be in Chicago back then. And we were in the middle of something, and now people are starting to recognize it and write things about it. But it was something back. It was really a good time to be there.
I don't know why. It was just a gut feeling. I didn't have anything to go on, but I thought for some reason that you were a Sinatra fan.
Oh, really?
Intuition or what? I don't know.
Well, I wonder if there is a time when, because I remember my dad used to listen to those songs and stuff, and I didn't like them, I didn't like having to listen to them. My dad, I just wasn't, I didn't like it. Then all of a sudden, one day you get mature enough, or maybe you have enough experiences under your belt, and then all of a sudden you realize that this is really good. This guy knows what he's singing about, and I don't know when that light bulb went on, but it did for me at one point. So I mean, I don't know if that's I got smarter. Sinatra didn't change. I guess I learned a few things, I guess.
And you make your home in California.
That's right.
How's that?
Well, today it's nice. We're having a lot of trouble with these wildfires out here, and which is a little bit oppressive. It's used to be that there was this fire season, and things do have to burn here. I mean, that's they've been doing that for a long time, but it just seems to be year round now. And the air is getting a little bit oppressive. I mean, it takes. What I heard, anyways, is that that the winds are taking some of these smoke particles and everything else and taking them all all the way to Colorado and different places. They have their own fires going too, but it's gotten rough out here. It's with the fire season and all, or there is no fire season. It seems to go year round now. But today the wind is blowing, and they seem to have some sort of control over some of the fires, and hopefully we'll get a handle on this. But it's it's a great state. It's terrible. I mean, it's terrible to see that. I just hope it's not our future. I hope that this is that this is not some kind of world that we're entering into, where the world is going to have this kind of unbreathable air. Because I can feel the difference, on a good day and a day when you just feel like you're sapped of all your energy because the air is thicker than it need be, But we're working at it. Every day we're trying to make it a little bit better.
If you could go back to the young Mike Hagerty when you were beginning your acting career and give him any piece of advice, what would you say to him?
I've been very fortunate in many respects. People sometimes tell me, that they have friends of theirs that they have somebody who's considering a life in theater or a life in wanting to get into films or whatever. But I have a hard time finding somebody, telling somebody not to try it if that's what they have to do. There's a lot of cliches out there as far as like, if you can do anything else, do it. Well, frankly, I couldn't do anything else. I don't think I could, anyways. But people helped me, and doors opened for me, and I didn't have to really do anything else besides what I love to do. So I would, tell me to do it. I was a little foolish at first. I mean, the first thing I did when I was a kid was I actually went to the phone book and looked up like talent agents or something like that. And you can find them in the phone book. But again, I would give my advice to me that I give to other people is to just work. Find a group of people, find a stage, some non-equity production house that's trying some experimental things. And there's nothing wrong with equity. I'm a member of Equity and SAG and AFTRA. But just to get on stage and do it. I mean, do it in college, do it in high school, do it, and eventually, if you're any good, if you're, good and lucky, or lucky and good, eventually you'll get some kind of paying gig, and then if that leads to something else, then just keep on following that, and then if it dead ends and all of a sudden you're not getting hired or not getting called or anything else, you have to be realistic about it too, and not sacrifice everything else for some dream. But if the doors keep on opening and the money keeps on coming in and you keep on working and you're happy, then for God's sakes, pursue it. I mean, the whole idea is is that if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And it's been good for me. So it's hard for me to tell friends of mine that say things like, well, try to talk them out of it or try to talk her out of it. It's hard for me to do that because it's been, in the words, it's been very, very good to me. So I just hope that people. I don't want to be the person to tell somebody, don't follow your dreams, but you also have to be realistic about it. I mean, if you're not making any money at it, nobody's hiring you, and you haven't gotten any of the auditions that you went on, or if you haven't gotten any auditions, it's time for maybe to consider something else. But if the doors are opening, walk through, see what happens.
Not just limited to acting. What would you say is the best thing about being Mike Hagerty? My friends, family. Got a lot of friends. I mean, a lot of people, and so I mean, it's very very important to me to have these people. Like I said earlier, I mean, I still have there's a dozen or so, maybe more, kids that I still know from grade school. That and never.
I'm sure that there must be some falling out I must have had with somebody over the years. Sometimes you don't hold up your end of the deal and reach out to them or talk with them, and so there may come a time when you were better friends, and somehow you let that fall apart or go away. But I got to say that most of the people, or everyone that I can think of right now, that I have met and pursued and stayed friends with, we're still close, still in contact, and even if we're not talking all the time, when we see each other, we're glad to see each other. So that's good. It's important to me, and I think it's important to them too. So there's nothing wrong with that, I guess.
My last question, very open-ended. Just going to give you the stage. This is how I like to end my interviews. Just let you take the microphone. For anyone who's listening in, wherever they might be, what would you say to them?
Well, if they're interested in what I've done with my life and things that I've been lucky enough to do, I guess I just like to thank them. I guess it's a contract that an actor enters into, whether he's on stage or in film or on television, and the contract isn't complete until the audience signs in and the audience becomes a part of that deal. So I've been lucky enough to do what I've done. For my life, I'll be 65 years old in May, and haven't had to do much of anything else except entertain. And if people enjoyed that and like what I've done, I'd simply say thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for spending time with us.
My pleasure.
I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
All right, sir. Have a wonderful evening. Until next time.
All right, my friend. All right, thank you, and best of luck with everything, okay?
I appreciate that.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.